All right, very good morning to everyone. Good morning, good morning. Hate to interrupt the good fellowship, but we do need to go ahead and get started. Good morning. All right. So glad to have everyone this morning at Market Street Church of Christ on our Sunday morning Bible study. We are indeed glad to have you here. We are studying the book of Leviticus. If you want to open up your Bible to Leviticus chapter 4, that's where we're going to be focusing on, beginning our study this morning. Again, we're glad to have you here. We're studying the book of Leviticus, and as I like to call it, it is the gospel of the Old Testament. And there's so many things in the book of Leviticus that teaches us and gives more, I would say, power and illustration to the gospel account of Jesus Christ. And you're really going to see that this morning as we look in Leviticus chapter 4. This is the outline that we have been using or will be using throughout the study. It is dividing the book into 7 different sections. Of course, you can divide the book into multiple different ways. For example, the first 17 chapters are about redemption, what that requires from God, and then the last chapters are about restoration. Or you can divide it into 4 different segments: the way to God, the work of God, the walk with God, and the worship of God. And then, of course, each of those chapters having their individual topics that they are dealing with. And so we're going to be focusing on right now, and still are, chapters 1 through 7. We'll finish up this section today. We started out looking at the sacrifices. As you see, chapters 1, 2, and 3, the burnt sacrifice, the meal sacrifice, and the peace sacrifice. And we talked about those, and I'll outline those more in just a second. Today we're going to be looking at the sin sacrifice, the trespass sacrifice, and then the instructions that go along with that. So all of these, chapters 1 through 7, have to do with laws pertaining to sacrifice. And so that you understand where we are and what's going on, this is the law of Moses. This is the next book after Exodus. So you have Moses having brought the children of Israel out under the hand, with the hand of God, and they're now in the wilderness at the base of Mount Sinai, and God has given them instruction. And the first instruction that He gives them is, here is how I want you to worship me, and this is where I want you to worship me. And He goes through all of Exodus giving you all those laws about the tabernacle. Everybody's familiar with the tabernacle and that complex where God will be living among His people, where He can interact with His people through Moses or through the high priest. So the next question, and where the book of Leviticus comes in, how do we use this tabernacle, God? What do you want us to do with this tabernacle? So we know where we're supposed to go. What are we supposed to do with it? That's what these chapters are. So chapters 1, 2, and 3 are talking about these offerings that you give. Now He presents those, chapters 1, 2, and 3, as here's some offerings that you do. Here's how you use the tabernacle. And now chapters 4 and 5, He's going to get into something that you need to do before you bring those other offerings. So let me reiterate it this way with this graphic. So He first starts out in chapter 1 explaining how to use the tabernacle, that altar and everything, by what's called burnt offerings. These are offerings that represent total commitment because the whole animal is burned on the altar, the main part of it. Now, we'll see later that there are some instructions that the skin is given to the priest, but it represents total commitment. You're giving this to God, and that is a beautiful image of what a Christian is supposed to do whenever they give their lives to God. And then secondly, you have what's called the grain offering. And notice that the burnt offering is written in red, the grain offering is written in black. That's because this is the only offering that doesn't have anything to do with blood. And we'll talk more about blood in just a second. It's also connected to the burnt offering, and all of these offerings are voluntary. You decide if you're going to do this. But you can bring things from your crops, things from even money is part of this, but it has to do with more than just the animals that you have. And then there is the peace offering, which again, written in red, representing there's blood involved. So both the burnt and the peace offerings are animals. The grain offering, of course, is those other things. And each one has its representation. The burnt offering, as I mentioned, total commitment. The grain offering is devotion. It is giving God thanks for the provision that He has provided. And then the peace offering is exactly what it sounds like. You're enjoying peace with God, and that is giving thanks to Him through fellowship. Now, question becomes, how does one get that peace? How does one get to the point they can offer these voluntarily? Well, you don't just come to the tabernacle and start giving these gifts. There's something that you have to do before. These are voluntary, but then the next ones are obligatory. You have to do these first. And so while he presents chapters 1, 2, and 3, and then 4 and 5, the order is actually the other way around. And so you have to have your sins expunged. You have to have them atoned before you can give these voluntary sacrifices. And again, notice that they're written in red, and especially those upper two, that has everything to do with blood. And I'll come back to this again in just a few moments. So, as we went through, we're going to be talking about blood a lot in this one, but the burnt offering, it is got its certain features that are including not only what you are giving, but also what the priests get. Same way with the grain offering, and we'll see this more in the latter chapters when he gives more instruction concerning these. And then each one has its part. And then we get into this all-important sin offering. So in chapter 4, if you will, read with me, beginning in verse 1. He says, "Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, If a person sins unintentionally against any of the commandments of the Lord, and anything which ought not to be done, and does any of them," let's just pause right there for a second. So he's outlining what this chapter is about. If anyone sins unintentionally. Now what he means by this is not just complete rebellion. This covers all sin. So not only things like complete rebellion against God, but even these are the chosen people of God. These are God's people. But here's a question for us today who are God's people. Can we still sin? Yes. And so this idea of sins unintentionally is the idea of drifting, of kind of going away from God's commands. Most people don't wake up and go, today I'm going to sin against God. Nobody does that. Usually what happens is we wake up and we go about our days and we start focusing on our day and we start doing things, and we may do something that is sinful and really not give it much mind. And then next thing you know, we keep working, we keep doing, we keep focusing on family, and we keep doing everything that we're doing. And then all of a sudden, it comes time, say Wednesday night, and we go, oh yeah, I got to go to church. God. And look how far I've drifted. Because I've been so focused on my life, and then I realize, oh, I haven't prayed. I've done a few things that I shouldn't do, that everything that's involved that is not what God wants me to do, which is why I love to call Wednesdays Recharge Wednesday, because it brings us back to God. That's what the Lord's Supper is for as well. What does He tell us to do in the Lord's Supper? He tells us to what? Examine ourselves. It's a reminder, and I don't know how you pray whenever you partake of the Lord's Supper, but I always pray, Lord, please forgive me, as this blood, as this fruit of the vine, and this bread that represents the body, represents that sacrifice. May I take it in a way that's pleasing and acceptable to you, but above all, please forgive me of my sins. It's a rededication of yourself to the Lord. That's why we take it every week, by the way, is to remind us. Some people will say, oh, if you take it every week, it loses its meaning. Oh, no. I look forward to that time because that's when I can be refreshed, if you will, or refocused, get back to center from where I've drifted off either side. Make sense? Comments or anything? Okay. So that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about sin. Now, what you're going to see is that there are different levels, kinds of sin. I wouldn't say there are different kinds of sins at different levels of sin. Let's put it that way. Because notice verse 3, if the anointed priest sins. Interesting. But before we go any further, I want you to jump down to verse 13. Now, if the whole congregation sins. Now jump over to verse 22. When a ruler has sinned. Now go down to verse 27. If any one of the common people have sinned. So what this chapter is about, this is called the sin offering. I'm going to go ahead and move forward to this one right here. This is the sin offering, and he's saying, I'm going to cover everyone. Who is the one that is closest to God? The high priest, right? The high priest. The next thing would be the congregation, God's people. But then he goes on and he says, even if a king, a ruler, or a prince sins, this is what's required of them. And then, of course, God cares about every individual, so this is for the common people. You see a pattern there? And here's my favorite part of this pattern, is that the high priest is the one who is interacting with God. He's the closest to God, and then you have God's people, and then you have a ruler. Isn't that fascinating? What do we typically do? We put rulers up here as the most important people. Who was it? Was it President Garfield, who whenever he was about to take the oath of office to be the President of the United States, he says, I am stepping down from the highest office of all to serve as President. He was talking about being an elder in the Church of Christ. That shows us the same pattern right here. The high priest, the congregation, then a king or a ruler. They're not more important than the one who is appointed by God, and then every individual. So I want you to see that in here. So notice there's a difference with what the high priest is to do. It says, bringing guilt on the people, then let him offer to the Lord for his sin, which he has sinned, a young bull without blemish as a sin offering. Before we go any further, how many of you know much about livestock? And you don't have to know a lot, but to know that what's more valuable, a full-grown bull that has everything, that is without blemish, that is perfect in every way, versus a sheep versus a bird? Which one's the most valuable? The bull. Does anybody know how much a bull sells for these days? Thousands upon thousands of dollars. And if you go to the Houston Livestock Exchange, you can get upwards in the close to 100,000 or more for a quality bull. So they're very valuable. So that's what he's picking first. He shall bring the bull to the door of the tabernacle of meeting before the Lord and lay his hand on the bull's head and kill the bull before the Lord. Now, jump down with me to the congregation. Same thing. It says they shall, if they sin in the eyes of the assembly, have done something against the commandments of the Lord, anything which should not be done, they are guilty. And so it says in verse 14, they shall offer a young bull. So same thing, very valuable animal. And the elders of the congregation shall lay their hands on the head of the bull before the Lord. I love that. So you have the high priest who brings this bull. This is his bull. Brings this and he places his hand on there. That same thing happens with the elders of the congregation. These are the leaders. How many tribes were there in Israel? 12. That means there'd be at least 12 leaders of the children of Israel would come, and they would put their hands on the head of that animal. So putting your hand on the animal, as we've talked about before, does many things. One, it shows you're identifying with that animal, that you are figuratively transferring your sin to this innocent animal. It is also a confession of sin. It is also saying that I am going to allow this to be, I recognize this is a substitute for me. It is its blood that's going to be shed instead of mine. But here's something I also see with all of these elders, the leaders of the church, or the congregation, I should say, of Israel coming together, is what does Hebrews chapter 13, verse 7 and 17 tell us? It says, for the elders, we are to submit to the elders because, why? Because they what? They have to give an account. Do you see some symbolism here? These elders are having to give an account. And that's what this bull represents. They're recognizing on behalf of the people, they're giving an account. They're being held responsible for the sins of these people. Does that not give more power to Hebrews 13, 7 and 17? In my mind it does. So you have them putting their hands on there. So now continuing with this same thing, so you see the difference. Go now to verse 22. When a ruler or a king has sinned and anything against the commandments of God, look at his, verse 23. He is an offering of a kid of the goats, a male without blemish. So it's not quite as valuable, still valuable, believe me, it's very valuable, but it's a lesser animal because, as I mentioned, kings are lesser in the eyes of God compared to his high priest. Does that still hold true today? Who's our high priest today? Are all the kings of the earth? What is Jesus called? The King of Kings. All right? And then you look down in verse 27, you got the common people, and notice there's a little bit of a difference. Verse 28, offering a kid of the goats, a female without blemish. And down in verse 32, he gives a different one. He says, if he brings a lamb as his sin offering, he shall bring a female without blemish. So he's making provisions for everyone. And first and foremost is that, of course, provision of the high priest, because as you're going to see, what happens is the people bring their sin offering to the tabernacle to give to the priest. And then the priest takes that sin offering in. Well, how can he do that if he has sin in his life? So the first thing that has to happen, going back now to verse 4, is the priest has to be atoned for. His sins need to be taken care of. And his sins, the way they're treated, are a little bit different than the common people and everyone else. Watch this. Verse 5, then the anointed priest shall take some of the bull's blood. I want you to take note how many times you see the word blood in this chapter. Takes the blood and brings it to the tabernacle of meeting. Let me back up this picture right here. Here's that tabernacle of meeting. So he brings it into this, and that yellow arrow represents the door. That's where this all starts. As you come into the presence of God at that door, that's where you'll put the hand on its head. The priest shall dip his, lay his hand on the bull's head and kill, verse 4, kill the bull before the Lord. So he's doing the killing. And then the appointed priest shall take some of the bull's blood and bring it to the tabernacle of meeting. The priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle some of the blood 7 times before the Lord in front of the veil of the sanctuary. Now, where is the veil? Who can tell me what's going on there? Where is the veil? What's that all about? What was that, brother?
In the tabernacle.
It's inside. So you see that tent that's there in the middle of that compound. That's the tabernacle itself. The whole thing is the tabernacle complex, but the tabernacle, the word means tent, is that tent there in the middle, and it's divided into two parts. You go in the first part, that's where the showbread is, and the lantern, the lamp, and then in front is a little altar where incense is burned, and behind that there's this curtain. And what's behind the curtain? The Ark of the Covenant, which has that mercy seat of those cherubim on top of it, and that's where God meets with Moses and later with the high priest. That's the Holy of Holies. So notice that this high priest goes into the tabernacle. Here's a simple question. Who's allowed into the tabernacle? According to what we read in Exodus. The priest, the high priest is allowed to go in, and so are priests. Who's allowed to go into the Holy of Holies? Only the high priest. There you go. So the high priest comes into the tabernacle with some of that blood, and he throws it there in front of the veil of the sanctuary. Now, we don't know if they actually put it on the veil or just right there on the ground in front of it, but it's right there in front of the altar of incense. All right, keep going, verse 7. And the priest shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of sweet incense before the Lord, which is in the tabernacle of meeting, and he shall pour the remaining blood of the bull at the base of the altar of the burnt offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle. So get the picture. So he takes the blood from this bull, he goes into the tabernacle, and there's the veil right there. He puts some on in front of the veil, whether that's on the veil or on the ground, and then he takes some of that blood and he puts it on the horns of that altar. Then he comes back outside and he pours the rest of it at the base of the altar of burnt sacrifice. So the little altar inside, which has the incense on it, also has these horns. So he's putting blood there, he's putting it on the ground, and then he's coming out and he's pouring it around the base of this altar. That's a lot of blood, isn't it? It's a lot of blood. Okay. He shall take from it, so once he's done that, here's what he does with the bull. He shall take, verse 8, take from it all the fat of the bull as the sin offering. The fat that covers the entrails, the fat which is on the entrails, the two kidneys, and the fat is on them by the flanks, and the fatty lobe attached to the liver above the kidneys he shall remove. And it was taken from the bull of sacrifice of the peace offering, and the priest shall burn them on the altar of the burnt offering. So that altar that you see there, he takes all of the fat, and that's what he burns on the altar. Now, as I mentioned last week, the fat and all this stuff that he's talking about here, that is the prime, that was considered the prime portion of this bull. So you have this extremely valuable bull. You kill it, you take its blood, you do those things. Now you dissect the bull. What's that called? Word's escaping me. Butcher, thank you. Butcher the animal in order to get inside, to get all these fat parts out. And then you take that and you burn it on the altar to the Lord. All right, this is the process so far, but we're not done. Notice what else happens. Verse 11, but the bull's hide. Is that valuable? Is bull's hide valuable these days? Still is. What do we call that? Leather. The bull's hide and all its flesh with its head and legs. So what are the legs important when it comes to a bull? Think of on a hog, they're called hams, right? But on a cow, that's some very valuable meat right there. And then its legs and its entrails and offal. So basically everything. You've taken the blood and you've done what you've done with that. Now you've gone in and you've taken out the fat, you've burned that, and essentially everything else, the entire rest of the bull is what we have left. Verse 12, the whole bull he shall carry outside the camp to a clean place where the ashes are poured out, and burn it on wood with fire where the ashes are poured out, and it shall be burned. So you kill this animal, very valuable animal, take its blood and sprinkle it and pour it, and then you take and butcher it, take the fat out, burn it, and then the rest of this animal, which is still very valuable, you take outside the camp and you burn it. You completely destroy it. That's pretty intense, don't you think? There's a lot of symbolism there. Number one, the blood. What does the blood represent? Life. Represents life. The life of the flesh is in the blood. Leviticus 17. The fat is the prime, the best portion, that most desired portion goes to God. It is burnt before God. It rises up as a sweet savor to Him. The rest of it is destroyed. Now I want you to notice something. Go to this one right here. I want you to notice that with the burnt offering, those voluntary offerings, there are pieces that are given to the priests. In the grain offering, there are portions of that are given to the priest, and even the one who brings the offering. They get to sit down and have a meal with the priest. When you have a peace offering, there are parts. In fact, the rest of the animal goes to the priest and to the offerer. There's something of that animal that you get the benefit from, or the priests get the benefit from. Don't forget, the priest, the Levites, receive no inheritance from God. Remember? That means they don't have all of the benefits and the wealth that the rest of the people have. So how are they sustained? They're sustained, God provided for them through these offerings. So they're constantly receiving grain and meat that they can use for their families and everything else. That's how they get part of their payment, if you will, how they receive the benefit of the promised land. But notice the sin offering, and you'll see it's the same in the trespass offering, it's all destroyed. There is no part. There's only God's portion that He receives, and everything else is destroyed. Do y'all see any kind of symbolism in there when it comes to sin? What does God say about our sin? Separation from God. So this is bringing restitution. But what does God do with our sin once He's forgiven us? There you go. He remembers it no more. It's been destroyed. And so all the rest of that bull is destroyed. You don't get to keep any of that. Should you keep any of your sin? You want to be forgiven of your sin, then you give that portion, that confession and that contrite heart to God, the best portion of your life, and the rest of it's going to be destroyed. You don't get to keep any of it. You see the symbolism there? What's happening here, y'all? This is a physical illustration of how serious sin is. When you take something as valuable and expensive as a bull and you kill it, and you take its blood, just its blood, and put that on there, which there's representation there we've already talked about, and then you take that prime portion and you just burn it up, and then you take the rest of that bull and destroy it. Does that not give you a vivid physical picture of how serious sin is to God? Is everybody tracking with me? I hope you're seeing this. You see why we call it the gospel of the Old Testament? All right, so now I want you to notice that in the congregation, as the leaders have placed their hands, it's going to be the same thing. It's a bull, and they're going to do the same thing. They're going to take that blood, and this time the priest is going to go in, and he's going to put that blood 7 times before the Lord in front of the veil, verse 17. And then he's going to pour the rest of the blood around the altar, verse 18. And then he's going to take the fat and burn it on the altar, verse 19, just like he did. And it's verse 20, and he shall do with the bull as he did with the bull as a sin offering, thus he shall do with it. So the priest shall make atonement for them, and it shall be forgiven them. Oh, that's a golden verse right there, y'all. So the high priest has had his sins taken care of, and now the congregation, these elders are coming forward, and they're doing the same thing, the same process, but the priest is taking those things. The elders of the congregation don't go into the tabernacle. Remember? Only the Levites. Everybody else are of the other tribes. They don't get to go into the tabernacle. So now the priest is carrying those sins in there and is doing all the things. And what does it say? The priest shall make atonement for them, and it shall be forgiven them. Does anybody in this room see Jesus Christ in verse 20? Isn't that what Jesus does for us? Isn't he our high priest? All right. And then same thing, verse 21. Then you shall carry the bull outside of camp and destroy it. Same process. For God's high priest as well as the congregation, his people. Just slightly different in the fact that it's the priest that carries that into the tabernacle for them instead of him doing it himself. All right, so now we get to the kings and the princes in verse 22. And as we already mentioned, it's a lesser animal. It's a kid. But you still, look in verse 25, after you kill it, the priest shall take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering and pour its blood at the base of the altar of burnt offering. Notice a difference. What's the difference between this sacrifice and what we just saw with the priest and the congregation? What's the big difference? Didn't go into the tabernacle. See the difference? So with the high priest and with the congregation, the elders of the congregation, they went into the tabernacle and took some of that blood in there. All right? But they didn't do that with the ruler. What does that represent? Not all rulers are in communion or in the congregation, I should say. Not all rulers are Christians. Not all rulers are God's people. Isn't that the case? All right, so this is why you will have sometimes a ruler or prince offer sacrifices to the Lord of hosts. So he's going through this process right here. And so that's why he makes this provision. All right, they take the blood, as mentioned, they pour it on the altar, and then it shall burn all of its fat, verse 26, on the altar, like the fat of the sacrifice of the peace offering. So the priest shall make atonement for him concerning his sin, and it shall be forgiven him. Then we get into the common people, because God cares about them. And he takes the female goat, and it says, lay his hand on the head of the sin offering, as we've talked about. Then verse 30, the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger, put it on the horns of the altar of the burnt offering, and the remaining blood at the base, and shall remove all of its fat. The fat is removed from the sacrifice like the peace offering, and the priest shall burn it on the altar for a sweet aroma to the Lord. So the priest shall make atonement for him, and it shall be forgiven. Same thing in verses 32 to the end. And the very last thing, he shall make atonement for his sin that he has committed, and it shall be forgiven him. Beautiful verses and a vivid visual picture of how serious sin is.
Some in the literal translation says prince.
Mm-hmm.
These people were in slavery for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
They just came out of it. Where's the prince coming from? A king coming from? They don't have one yet.
That's right. Great point. In fact, they won't have a king or a prince or any kind of ruler. That's a great point. He's given this at the base of Mount Sinai. So we know for 40 years they didn't have a prince or a ruler. And then we get into the time of Judges. They still don't have a prince or a ruler until we get into, is it 1 Kings chapter 8? No, 1 Samuel chapter 8, I believe it is. Whenever Samuel is upset because why? The people wanted a king. There you go. Great point, Paul. Leader, yeah. A prince, king, ruler, leader. So someone who is of an importance there. All right. Any other thoughts before we move on to the trespass offering? Yes, Josh.
Yeah, just to reiterate that point. I mean, I think it's a common term for ruler, which could mean king or prince. And you have, like, say, King James, for example, translates it prince. But other places in Numbers, Leviticus, it talks about just princes of Reuben.
Yes. Ruling class.
Royalty,
yeah.
But they're like the tribe
Even somebody like, think about Gideon. I mean, Gideon would still be considered a ruler because he had been placed as a judge. And so there you go. All right, yes, Bob.
You may be fixing to get to it, but these are offerings for sins that are of either ignorance or unintentional. What about intentional sins?
He's going to get into that now. Verse chapter 5. Now, chapter 4 does cover all sin. It is sin in general. But chapter 5 now gets into blatant, like you willfully did these things, all right? So verse 1, if a person sins in the hearing of the utterance of an oath as a witness, whether he has seen or known of the matter and does not tell it, he bears guilt. Or if a person touches any unclean thing, whether it is the carcass of an unclean beast, carcass of unclean livestock, the carcass of unclean creeping things, etc., or if he touches a human uncleanness, he shall be guilty. When he realizes it, then he shall be guilty. Or if a person swears, speaking thoughtlessly with his lips, to do evil or to do good, whatever it is that a man may pronounce by an oath, and he is unaware of it, when he realizes it, then he shall be guilty of those matters. So there it is. You come to recognize, oh, I've committed sin. I have trespassed against the laws of God. It says, verse 5, and it shall be when he is guilty in any of these matters, he shall confess. Isn't that interesting? Here we have thousands of years before Paul writes down, or even Jesus says, confess me before men, or Paul writes down confession for salvation. Right here we see confession for forgiveness of sin, or to start that process of being forgiven. Confess that he has sinned in that thing, and he shall bring his trespass offering to the Lord for his sin which he has committed, a female from the flock of the lamb, or a kid of the goats as a sin offering, so the priest shall make atonement for him concerning his sin. So that he goes on, and the rest of this he's going to give provisions for the different types. So if you're poor and you don't have a kid or a goat that you can, when I say kid, I'm talking about animals, not children. There is a difference. And you don't have that, you can bring some turtle doves, which is more easily obtainable, or you can even bring, as he makes provision a little bit later, 1/10 and an ephah of fine flour as this sin offering. So he provides for everyone whenever you are guilty of these laws of God and you come to realize it, you need to make it right. So God is giving them an opportunity to be forgiven. And notice it says they shall be forgiven. Verse 10, it's like a burnt offering. At the very last it says, on behalf for his sin which he has committed, it shall be forgiven him. We got to address something. How did they receive forgiveness if Christ hadn't died yet? How are these people getting forgiveness?
Roll forward.
What's that?
Roll forward.
So there's a phrase that's used often, is the idea of their sins are rolled forward. And that's not wrong, but it's not, in my mind, doesn't quite capture exactly what happens with Jesus' blood. And I heard this one time, and I think this helps explain it a little bit better. So, number one, are their sins forgiven? Yes, thank you. Yes, they are forgiven. How is it that they're forgiven? Well, because number one, they did what God asked. God says, this must happen. You must do these things, and blood is required. But we know, as Hebrews says, the blood of bulls and goats does not provide forgiveness. So here's what happens. Jesus Christ dies on the cross, and that blood is shed. It is poured out for the forgiveness of sins. That's how we are forgiven. Where are we in relation to the cross? 2,000 years in the future. Does Jesus' blood still forgive us today? Yes. So it went forward, right? It went into the future. But Jesus' blood also went backwards. It covers all of history. So when they did these things that was according to the law of God, blood was spilt, when Jesus died on the cross, here's a way of explaining it. It validates that blood that they used then. What do I mean by that? Think about a parking pass. You go in to a business or someplace and you go into the parking garage and they give you spits out the little ticket and you have the ticket, right? And so then you go into wherever it is you're visiting and you're saying, hey, can I get my parking pass validated? Oh yeah, absolutely. And they stamp it or whatever. What just happened? They just paid for your parking, right? It's paid for. So what happens now, you have this validation, this validated parking pass, you can now leave without having to pay. That's kind of the way this is. It's like they have their parking pass, and when Jesus' blood comes along, they validate it. You got a thought?
Another way to look at that is the way I've been told it is the check was already written.
The check was written. There, I love that.
It wasn't cashed yet, but it was written. So
The check was written, but it wasn't cashed yet. Another great analogy. Does that help explain things? Because when we read this, we go, how are they forgiven? How are they getting all this forgiveness? All right. So that's, in a nutshell, the trespass offering and the sin offering. Real quick to wrap this up, when we get to chapter 6, verses 1 through 7 continues more information about the trespass offering. He's giving more instances of what that means. If you do this, this is what the trespass offering covers. If you do that, this is what the trespass offering covers. Then at the verse, and you'll notice this up here on the screen, you see the burnt offering, chapter 6, verse 8 through 13. What he does there is he's giving more information. In chapter 1, he dealt with the sacrifice itself. Now in chapter 6, he's giving information and instructions to the priest of what they're supposed to do. And so he's telling, for example, priest, you need to make sure the fire on the altar is burning and is perpetual. It never goes out. And then you need to take off your garments, your linen garments, when you take the ashes outside of the camp to a clean place. So he's given instructions specifically to the priest of how to deal with the burnt offering. Then you get into verse 14 through 23, and he gives details about how to deal with the grain offering, including here's how you eat it, where you eat it, when you eat it, and those sort of things. So it's a provision for you, but there's still rules attached to it. Then you get to verse 24 to verse 30, and there he is dealing with more information about the sin offering that was in chapter 4. And he's saying in verse 30, no sin offering from which any of the blood is brought into the tabernacle of meeting to make atonements in the holy place shall be eaten. It shall be burned in fire. So he's reiterating that whole thing. If the blood is taken inside the tabernacle, you do not get a portion of that. And then chapter 7, he continues with more information. Now he gives some laws about the trespass offering. And he's saying that every male, verse 6, may eat of it. He even goes on to say that you can keep the skin of that offering. I think that's right. Yep, verse 8. The priest who offers anyone's burnt offering, that priest shall have for himself the skin of the burnt offering which is offered. That actually goes back to the burnt offering, not the trespass offering. And then verses 11 and forward are verses that deal with the law of the peace offering. And so part of that is, and this peace offering is the right thigh of the animal is given to the priest. There's other parts that are given to him, and they're called a heave offering. And that simply means they heave it up before the Lord like this. And then there's another one. It is called a wave offering. Same thing. They're waving it to the Lord. And it's simply a symbolic measure that God is providing this for his servants, the priest, in that. The rest of this are all placed in their hands. It's all rules for the various priests and additional instruction. Chapters 1 through 7 having to deal with the sacrifices, and I hope that this morning it has given you more vivid imagery of how serious sin really is to God. Thank you so much for your attention. We're going to prepare for our worship service now.